In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the front strut assemblies on this Ford F-150. We're going to be installing these performance TRQ struts. These are located right behind your front wheel. It is recommended that you do these in pairs and also that you get an alignment after the job is done. Let's get started. With the vehicle safely raised and supported, use a 21mm socket, remove all 6 lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. With the wheel off, on the side of the knuckle you'll see a 10mm bolt and an 8mm headed bolt. Both of these have to come off so we can get more slack both in the ABS wire and the brake hose. When we pull the knuckle forward, we don't want these to get pulled on. There's one. I'm just going to put it back so I don't lose it. And the 10mm. Same with this one. I'm not going to bother unhooking it from here because all of these will stay grouped together. We just needed a little bit more slack. I will, however, unclip these two from this bracket. This is the ABS wire and this is the vacuum hose for the vacuum hubs if you have 4-wheel drive. So if you have a 2-wheel drive truck, this actually won't be here. Using a trim tool, pull these straight out of the bracket. To be safe, I'm going to pull the axle nut off. I don't want to separate it when the knuckle comes forward a little bit. So let's remove this cap. The easiest way to do it is with some pliers. Grab onto the sides of it, wiggle it back and forth, and eventually it should pop right off. Now with a 13mm socket, remove the axle nut. We want to ensure the axle will push through, so I'm going to take a punch, put it right in the center, and with a hammer, tap it to make sure it actually will break free. There we go. That's perfect. We'll leave that right there. If there's any debris that got in here, remove it. That's actually a bearing. With a 21mm socket, remove the tie rod stud mounting nut, and then we can pull the tie rod out of the knuckle. You can remove this a couple different ways. If you want to put the nut back on and then hammer on the end of the stud straight up, you could do that. I'm going to try it, but if not, we can't hammer on the knuckle because it's aluminum, so we'll have to use a tie rod separator to push this up from the knuckle. Looks like that worked for me. Once again, don't hammer on the knuckle, it is aluminum. Pull this out. Now with an 18mm socket, remove the ball joint stud nut that secures the knuckle at the top. Best way to get to this is with a swivel and a deep socket. With this off, start it back on a few threads because now we have to separate this ball joint and we don't want it to fly open and everything fall forward. We want this to stay secured somewhat and then we separate it when we're ready to. Once again, with the aluminum knuckle, you don't want to use a steel hammer to tap it. However, I will be using a dead blow rubber mallet. We'll see if that works. If not, ball joint separator it is. There we go. Looks like that trick worked. Use a pry bar to push the control arm down, have it hooked onto the strut or the spring, remove the mounting nut. And with that removed, slowly push the control arm up or let it go up by itself, really. As the knuckle comes forward, make sure the axle pops through and make sure you don't pull on your brake hose, ABS wire, or even this vacuum hose. I'm going to bungee cord the knuckle like this. This is as far as it needs to go. That way, it's not going to put extra tension on these. For this job, we have to disconnect the sway bar link because it's going to make removing the strut so much easier. So with an 18mm socket, we're going to have to remove this mounting nut. You can hold the top of the stud right here on this cutout with an 8mm, but before I do any of that, I'm going to take a wire brush or a wire wheel on a drill and clean the threads. It's going to be quite difficult to remove as it is, but with the rust, it's going to make it even worse. So I want to give the threads a quick cleaning so it can slide over a lot easier. Careful with the brake hose and the vacuum line here. A little bit of rust penetrant should help out as well. First, I'm going to use an 18mm socket on my impact gun just to try to break this free and partially remove it, hopefully. And then we'll have to most likely do it by hand with a wrench and an 8mm socket up top. All right, well, that did half the work for us. 18mm wrench, 8mm socket. Let's try and remove this the rest of the way. Going to turn this so that the ratchet props up against the spring. All right, looks like we got it. At the top of the strut where it mounts to the frame, you'll see 3 18mm mounting nuts. The third one is actually a little bit more difficult to see. It's right back there, but you can easily get to all of them right through here. So, ratchet and a socket, remove all 3 18mm mounting nuts. These shouldn't be very tight. Once you get them off about halfway, they should just slide right off. And lastly, the one that's in the back. And there's the last one. Now if you move the strut, you'll see that it moves around, which is perfect. Underneath the lower control arm, we have 2 18mm mounting nuts bolting on the strut onto the lower control arm, so remove both of these. Now using a pry bar and maneuvering this strut around, remove it from the truck. I'm going to start by prying it up out of the lower control arm. Once I push it up and the studs come out, I can then pull it down and it'll come out of the top. Pull it down, and there is your strut assembly. Let's get the new strut in, and to do this, you want to line up the top 3 mounting bolts or studs with the holes in the frame. Push it through, and at the bottom, press it into position on the control arm. This new one is not going to have studs going through. We're going to use bolts. So this actually makes it a lot easier to install because there aren't 2 very long studs in the way, so you don't really have to pry anything. Push the strut up in position and have one mounting nut ready just to secure it on here. There we go. And then install the other ones. Although I'm going to wait to torque them, I can bottom them out now and get them snug, so I know that this strut is seated all the way at the top. So we'll come back to tighten it after the lower bolts are installed so we can put upwards pressure on it, either with the weight of the truck at the end or with a pull jack, and then we'll torque these properly. Now let's resecure the strut on the bottom. I have 2 bolts that'll go down in here. Just push it and then tap the bolt down. And you can drop the other one in. Might need to pry a little bit on this. There we go. Just move it around as needed till the bolts drop down. And I put some anti-seize on the shank of the bolts so that they don't rust. If water gets in there, it should protect it and keep them nice and clean. As for the mounting nuts, you can reuse the originals if you want to, or you can source new ones. Put those back on the bottom, and because we have a bolt here instead of a stud that's pressed into the bottom of the strut, we're most likely going to have to hold the top of the bolt with a wrench, so whatever bolt size you have, use the appropriately sized wrench to hold it. Torque these 2 mounting nuts to 66 foot-pounds. If needed, hold the top of the bolt so it doesn't spin. Now I have a pull jack underneath the lower control arm. I'm going to raise this up just a little bit so I can apply some pressure to the strut so then we can torque the top mounting nuts. There we go. Just a little bit to ensure that it's fully seated. Torque these to 52 foot-pounds. Now you can remove your support. Let's put the sway bar link mounting nut back on. I put some anti-seize on the threads just to help the nut go down a little smoother than it came off. And hopefully we could just use a power tool to bottom it out this time. 18mm socket. Perfect. Torque this to 52 foot-pounds. Now we're ready to put the knuckle back up on the upper ball joint. We need a few things to happen at the same time. One, lining up the knuckle to the upper ball joint, of course. We need to have a pry bar ready to pry this down to lock it in. And we want to make sure the axle seats into the hub at the same time. Let me get my pry bar ready. Push the knuckle, undo my bungee cord. Check the axle. Wiggle it around, that's seated. And push this down. And now have the mounting nut ready to slide back on. Get your tool ready. This is the one that we needed a swivel for. Push down on the control arm, bottom this out. And now let's torque this to 46 foot-pounds. The knuckle's going to want to turn, but as soon as it bottoms out, you should be able to torque it. Take your tie rod, put it back through the knuckle, and put the nut on. Bottom this out with a 21mm socket, and torque it to 76 foot-pounds. That's it. Reinstall the axle nut, bottom it out, and torque it to 30 foot-pounds. 30 foot-pounds is really not that much, so I was able to just hold the hub from spinning just with my hands by the lug studs. But if you need to, stick a pry bar through the studs and that should do the job. Put the little cap back on that goes over the axle nut. I like to put some grease right around where it seats, tap it in with a rubber mallet. That's bottomed out. Let's resecure the ABS wire on this bracket by the brake line and the vacuum hose if your truck had one. And these two brackets over here, we'll start with the brake hose bracket. Make sure that hook goes into its opening. Bottom it out and snug it. If you're doing this by hand, about 1/8 of a turn at most after it bottoms out is plenty tight. And the ABS wire bracket. Same thing, 1/8 of a turn at most after it bottoms out. Both of these are snugged, so everything's resecured. Let's get the wheel on. We'll start all 6 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then also in a cross pattern, we'll torque them to 150 foot-pounds. $150 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, here we go. Double check them. There you have it. Take it for a road test and get an alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.